Hi everybody, welcome to today's webinar from Messy to Migratable, Streamlining Collections Data with Excel. A little bit about me if you're new to our webinars. I'm Rachel Woody. I'm the founder and director of Relicura. We are in the specialization of collections management and digital collections infrastructure, which can encompass anything from helping set up processes and tools to data cleanup and migration. All of the very niche and very data-heavy aspects of which is relevant for today's webinar. And I have 20 years in the archives, museums, and cultural heritage field. A little bit of housekeeping before we begin. A link to this recording and any resources we share will be sent about 24 hours from the premiere. So if you've signed up and registered for the webinar, you'll receive an email with those goodies. This session is pre-recorded so that I can deliver the maximum amount of information to you and to be able to help answer any sort of follow-up questions in the chat box. Speaking of which, we are using the YouTube platform to help share this webinar. So if you have a YouTube or a Google account login, please feel free to also participate in the chat, share your questions, examples, etc. And related to that YouTube player, you will have access to any of the common YouTube player tools, including closed captioning. And then please remember to respect that this is my content and intellectual property, and to be respectful and keep that in mind when sharing. A bit of a disclaimer before we get started. I am by no means an Excel savant or like massive formula creator, but I have been working around and in data cleanup long enough that I have a few different functions and formulas that I use all the time to help with massive data cleanup projects. And so that's what I am sharing from with the collections cleanup in mind. For our content today, we're doing a little bit of slide deck just to introduce you to the functions and formulas that we'll demonstrate later today. So I'll go through the cleanup examples and talk about the different scenarios where we will be looking at data and where cleanup typically is involved. We'll talk about the Excel functions or formulas that are involved and can assist with those particular use cases. And then we'll actually do the cleanup demonstration so that you can see the function or formula in action. A free resource for you if you are in the midst of data cleanup or curious about any sort of cleanup and prep. If you've got a move to a new collections management system coming up, I partnered with Oregon Heritage Commission a couple of years ago now, and we created this great resource, completely free. You can go to their website and get an e-copy, and it leads you through all of the nuts and bolts from thinking higher level planning, strategy, logistics, through thinking over the different data cleanup approaches, and depending on what system you have or what system you're going into, there may be more or less cleanup approaches or tools available to you. This book walks you through all of it. It's system agnostic, so it covers sort of all of the different scenarios you could find yourself in, regardless of the tools you're using. So a great resource if that is something you are working on. Related, we have over at the Relicura YouTube channel, we've got, I think it's 5 now, webinars. This will be the 6th one on data cleanup, data related stuff. I mentioned this because we are going to jump right in to data cleanup and looking at, in my opinion, more advanced function and formula, more advanced sort of approaches to areas of data cleanup today in this video. If you're looking for additional data cleanup or perhaps some of the more nuts and bolts, basic kind of cleanup, we have 2 other walkthroughs of data cleanup videos available. So plenty of more content for you to use and reference. We also have things to think about and prepare for getting into data cleanup. And I want to stress these because when I've had folks join me for these webinars in the past with the actual walkthroughs, some of you had a great amount of anxiety because we went right into data cleanup, even though it is junk data that I'm cleaning up for you all at home. People were very anxious because there wasn't any of the reviewing the data, talking about quality control checks, etc. All of that is covered in these preparatory webinars. So soothe your anxiety. And also, if you are doing this type of work, please also check those out so that you can make sure you've set yourself up for success. That does not mean that you can't watch today's webinar, though. We will happily get into and demonstrate these more advanced functions and formulas. I just want you to be aware there's a whole bunch of foundational stuff available to you as well if you're embarking on this type of project. And so remember, these are the salient points for those who are more anxious when watching me do data cleanup. Always work with a copy of your data. Never work with the only copy of your data. Use obvious file names when you're working in your cleanup spreadsheets. Include dates. And this is important for the next one because I want you to save a version of every file as a separate version. So every time you, for example, if you're doing massive cleanup over several days, save a file for each day. And this is incredibly helpful because when you're doing such massive transformation in this data cleanup process, stuff happens. You make mistakes as a human, Excel makes mistakes as Excel, things happen to the data that were perhaps unexpected, and as you do massive cleanup actions upon actions, it becomes harder and harder to actually find that mistake and undo it. So having different versions at different times can be a real lifesaver. Related, as in an effort to minimize some of those unexpected errors, the data that you're doing these bulk transformations for have to be consistent. They have to be consistently formatted, have to be consistently the same types of data, because we are relying on that consistency to be the logic behind some of these major changes that we are going to do. So keep that in mind. That's also part of the preparatory work that's talked about in those other webinars. And just an asterisk, consistently formatted doesn't mean it has to be correct, because that's part of the data cleanup process, right? And if there are areas of data where it's just like there's no way to make it consistent, then a more manual cleanup effort will have to happen for those versus the rest that could be bulk applied. And to wrap us up, test data transformation on small batches, especially if it's a newer type of data cleanup function or formula that you're running. Test it out, especially to make sure that it is giving you the result that you are expecting. And then always quality control against previous data versions. So especially if you're stripping data out and putting data back in, and they're all supposed to connect to like an object record or a loan record, etc., making sure that those relationships are maintained and accurate, that nothing got shifted or lost. So always quality check against a few records where you can see that the data is transformed correctly. All right, clean up examples. We're going to focus on 4 today, and it's going to be very hierarchy/vocab driven, which is automatically puts it into the more advanced level, because not only are we thinking about data that needs to be in a specific format, we are thinking about data that needs to be connected to an object, but also needs to have this hierarchical format with it. For this, there are functions and formulas that can help us put together or split apart hierarchies, of which we'll talk about today. But it does give it that sort of a more advanced degree of difficulty, especially depending on what the shape of your data is in currently. So first one, we're going to separate out part of a hierarchical data example. This one is perhaps less common, but when it is present, it is pervasive. And there are, my most recent use case example has been in collection data that's been geography based. And so for the geography, it had the usual country, state, county, city, but then it had a whole bunch of very specific local information that was currently attached, but would actually serve us better in a different field. So we actually needed to separate out, in this case, part of the hierarchy, but still retain that object link, which makes that the fun part. For the second example, we're going to create a hierarchy. And this particular one is more prevalent where whatever system or perhaps spreadsheet you were in previously, there was perhaps not a method or easy way for you to use or create your own hierarchical vocab. And so needing to do that now before you go into a new system, for example. So we'll take a look at creating hierarchical data, especially when the data is split across into different cells. We will then talk about removing extra characters. In this case, we're going to use extra character as the comma that enters the cell after you do some of the functions in Excel Power Query. I'll show you why that happens and also how we can easily remove it. That comes up for me more often than I would like. And then for our final one, we're going to do a check vocab function or formula in this case to check the hierarchies that we've created. This will help us easily view that the structure is consistent, that there's no spelling errors or variations of like one's plural and one's not, for example. So we'll show you how to do that vocab check at the end. All right, so looking at the functions and formulas, I'll do an overview of all four, and then we'll get into the demonstration piece. So for the functions, we're going to look at the text split function, but in Power Query. So this is not just the like simple data tab and text split across two columns. We're going to get a little fancy with it. And then also in Power Query, we're going to do a merge with hierarchy creation. So not just a like merge these two cells, also getting fancy with that one. And then for the formulas, we are in this next one going to do that extra character removal, in this case the extra commas, and then that creation of the unique values from your entire vocab list to help do that visual quality check. To introduce this first one, the text split retain relationship, we want to do this one to separate out the data but still maintain that link to that object number. This particular function can be incredibly helpful for many things, but most often is used to help separate out something that was connected already to different data. And in our example case, it will be connected to a piece of what was hierarchical vocab. But in general, anytime you need to separate out a chunk of data, but still have it connected to that object or archives collection, item, record, this is the function to use. Okay, so here I have my example of, in this case, geography terms. But again, you could use this for any hierarchical vocab situation. It is hierarchical in the sense that for this particular system, it chooses to use commas to indicate a hierarchy level. So we have, in this case, country as the top layer, state, second layer, county name, city, and then we've got some of this fun, fake, very super local, niche kind of data where we're getting like a sample road address, a particular farm or square, and a particular actual business in a district of the city. So very specific, and as you can see, especially for if someone is of the preference to keep the vocab very pristine and being able to see all the things, in this case in Roseburg, and not wanting to have to also like further drill down into these niche areas, we want to, for this use case, separate out then all of these different little niche areas. We don't want to lose that data, but we do want to still maintain its connection to the object and then just put it in a different slot, whether it's a different field or different vocab, which we can, after we separate out, can change whether it's the vocab type or putting it into a different field. I do want to highlight here, because we are going to have a little issue intentionally. You'll notice that in this particular example, I have another hierarchy level indicated here just by the nature of having that comma. Because the system in this case will interpret every comma as a hierarchy level, this essentially is giving me, from the system perspective, two different levels, but in reality, this is all, for me as a human, one thing that I want to remove from the hierarchy, move somewhere else. And that means that if I'm doing my text split, while I can get fancy with it and dictate some of it, I cannot dictate, or at least not that I've been able to find out in my studies, cannot dictate, well, just make an exception for this one. This comma counts, but the others don't. So what it's going to do is it's going to actually only give me this last part, and as a flag for us to remember, this is why the data needs to be consistent if we are doing these bulk kind of changes, because it's going to behave exactly, and it's not going to be smart enough that we as a human, we're like, oh, actually that one was an exception, and we as humans have to account for that sort of unknowingness on the machine's part. All right, so I am going to launch Power Query. All right, so I've launched Power Query. It will display in this lovely little format. You'll notice over here on the right-hand side that it will record each of the different transformations we make when we're in this mode. This is incredibly helpful, especially as you make changes. If one of them goes unexpectedly wrong from our perspective, we can automatically nix that change and it reverts back to the data before. So let me make this a little larger so we can see all of our data here. This is the column that is of interest to me that I want to do the split function for, and we are going to get into this guy. Split column by delimiter. So far this looks very normal and what you could have done in Excel normally, but we want to do an advanced version because not only do I want to specify what that hierarchy value is, in this case the comma, I also need to add an additional character to it because it's not just the comma. For this particular system, it's a comma and then it's giving us a space. So now I need two different sort of values recorded in here instead of just the comma. So that part one of being fancy, being able to establish specifically in those two parts. I want it to also, next level of fancy, consider only the rightmost delimiter. So only that rightmost comma, because I only want that last little part of the hierarchy chopped off and moved somewhere else. So I don't want the first one, I don't want every occurrence of the comma, which we've done previously when we wanted to completely break a hierarchy. I want the right and lastmost version. And now finally, sort of the last level of fancy is I don't want it split into columns, which also we've done previously in our examples here. I need it to be connected to that object record, but on a whole different level. And so I need it to split, but into rows. So we've got several different adjustments here that is only possible when we're in Power Query editor of Excel versus like the normal data area of Excel. All right. So we've executed that. Again, if I made a mistake, we could just cross this out right here. And you'll see that it has chopped everything off here on that last comma. And we see here our little mistake where we didn't realize, well, we did. But in our example, we didn't realize that we actually wanted to chop both these off, but it had a comma. So we've got otherwise correctly just that last little section of our hierarchies chopped off, moved to the next line, and connected correctly to that same object number. We'll need to do some finessing. Obviously, if we have other examples of what happened to our ABC road, we'll have to address those perhaps a little bit manually depending on the quantity there. But otherwise, this is looking good, so I want it to actually close and load to my spreadsheet. Now it is going to give it to you in this new little format, which is not friendly for our databases, so we actually want to get rid of that. I always get rid of the color because that bothers my brain, so that's like the first thing I do. But more importantly, this little convert to range is necessary so that you can actually correctly edit and then incorporate it back into your database. It's going to give you a warning because it is basically trying to say, well, if you do that, we can't more easily launch back into Power Query, which for our purposes is fine. Hopefully we're done with Power Query. And then I'm going to remove this little row here that it gave us that is unnecessary. So we're back to my original row headers. Again, very important if I am importing back into my system. And if I was going to adjust these, oh, maybe I don't want it to be the same vocab, maybe I want it to actually be like a local whatever, you can make those changes. And basically any other sort of massaging that you would like to do before you import your things back into your system. So this is the text splitting, but maintain that relationship to the relevant object record. All right, for our next one, we're going to do the opposite, essentially, and opposite of what several different functions we've demoed over the last few webinars. We're going to create a hierarchy in this case, and this is merge function, but it's a more advanced version. So we're not just merging together maybe 2 cells worth. We want to merge together up to several, perhaps, columns worth of data to then insert and dictate that insertion of whatever character there needs to be to indicate to the system that this is a hierarchy. So if you remember our geography example that we just looked at, the particular system involved there was specifying a comma space in Excel format to indicate that these were hierarchy levels. We're going to create the same thing here in creating a hierarchy from what was, in this use case, a flat vocab. Similar to the split, this function can be helpful for a variety of things or portions of this particular function, but especially so if you are trying to put together multiple points of data in a very specific format. So keep that in mind. I'm going to go ahead and switch to our data now. All right, so what we're looking at here is a materials vocab example. We've got our little fake object numbers over here. We've got, in this case, sort of what was some different sorts of vocab. We were able to basically do a reverse of last time and get the object number connected to multiple points of data. You'll notice we've got some inconsistencies here, which is partly why we're going to get into our third portion of our demonstration. But I'm going to highlight here, we are looking across what is essentially 5 different columns of data to create up to 5 levels of a hierarchy. Some of our vocabs have all 5 levels, many others do not. And so the function we are going to use is going to merge them all together, but it will, where there are these empty columns, it's still going to try and merge those columns, and it's still going to give us essentially empty comma spaces because it's doing its best to be helpful. And it's very binary, it's all or nothing, which will then go and clean up with some of our, with a formula next on how to do that. But I want to highlight that for you, that this is exactly why we're going to go see those extra commas. So I'm going to launch Power Query. All right, so I've launched Power Query. You'll see now that the Power Query is very helpfully letting us know that some of these cells have no data in them, they're null values. That's fine. We are then going to select these columns, all of the columns essentially that I want all of that data to be merged with. We are going to go up to the Transform tab this time and get into the Merge Columns section over here. And similar to split text, we are doing it in Power Query because we want to dictate some specific levels of fanciness in order to get it into a hierarchy format that will work for our system. So I'm going to tell it custom because not only do I need a comma, I'm going to need a space after that comma. And it will ask you what that new column name should be. For the moment, I'm going to let it name it merged. Just so that there's no confusion in the data that we're looking at, but you could rename that to, in this case, materials, and before you import, making sure we clear out the other materials columns. So flagging that here because you could rename it there. All right, so as you can see, it has created 1 column from those 5 columns. We can already see we've got some little orphaned comma spaces over here. That was expected. We will deal with that in a moment. So I'm going to close and load. All right, again, put it in a format that would make it hard for you to edit, let alone import into your system. No, thank you. Apparently hit the wrong keys here. All right. Changing the color because it bothers me. And then that important convert to range, and this is in the table tab specifically. It gives you the warning, we're fine, and we're gonna eliminate this top row that it automatically inserts. You'll notice here that where you could have renamed the merged column, it basically merged all of the column headers that I had. That's fine, I'll rename it right now to materials. And then now we've got those extra little commas to deal with. So I'm going to switch back to the slide deck, show you the formula that we'll be looking at, and then we'll apply that formula. Okay, so for those orphaned commas, or comma could be whatever your collections management system decides is the character it's using to indicate hierarchy. It could be a pipe, a tilde, a semicolon, whatever. Essentially swap comma out for whatever that is for you. But we need this formula to do two things. We need the formula to be smart enough to look at the values in the cell and determine after the data, are there any comma spaces occurring after the bulk of my data? And if there is, then remove them. I don't want it to remove all the commas because we put those there on purpose. I only want those commas at the end removed. This particular formula is the simple version of just like there's a comma and a space. For us, it is not simple because we had 5 columns worth. We have up to 3 or maybe even 4 orphaned commas on some of those values, and we have a variety of the number of values. What's nice about the more advanced version of this formula is it's this same formula, but it's nested, and it helps us to account for whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4 orphaned comma spaces and only removing the correct number. So it's not going to necessarily, I'm going to remove 4 commas and only 4 commas. It's going to be smart enough to be like, in this instance, there's 1 comma space, but in this one, there's 3 comma spaces. Either way, I'm removing them is what's happening here. So for the formula I'm going to use, it'll be this advanced nested version, but essentially this is the gist of it, is we're asking it to evaluate if there's a comma space at the end of our value, and if there is, we want it removed. Okay, I'm going to get back to our spreadsheet. We're going to put our formula in column C, and then I just realized for this one, for various reasons, I have my formula in C. So let me actually, just to make it easy for our demo, I'll pretend we've got a type still in here where I indicate this is materials. And that way I don't need to change my formula for you. And then I have a cheat sheet, which you can't see at the moment, otherwise I'd make everything tiny. But I recommend that you keep a cheat sheet of all of the formulas that are incredibly helpful to you. It is much easier, especially with these more advanced versions, to do a copy paste of a formula and tweak it for the cells that you need than it is to try and create it from scratch. Anytime I think I am smart enough to remember and create it from scratch, it does not work out for me. So cheat sheet is what I recommend. That is not the value I want. That's for the next one. Let's try again. Okay, so here's my beautifully messy nested, well, I guess it's not messy according to Excel. It thinks it's very sophisticated, but all of that to basically be like, are there extra comma spaces and rather than the number, let's remove them. So copy paste, enter, and here we go. Instead of these 3 comma spaces at the end over here, I now have simply the 2 levels of the hierarchy correctly, no additional comma spaces. Because this formula worked correctly, I'm just going to double click on the end there, which mass applies the formula down and automatically makes the adjustments for the cells that it's reviewing. And you can see here, this one didn't have, because it was full in the hierarchy, didn't have any comma spaces as orphans at the end, and it's fine, nothing adverse happened to it, and the formula was smart enough to remove the correct amount of comma spaces at the end. Now, just a reminder, these cells, while they look human readable to us, the actual values in them are still that nested formula. So if you were to try and import this back into your system, it would not be happy. We need to do a copy paste special basically. So if I copy these, we're going to paste special and we're going to paste values. So this is just a quick and easy way to say, okay, we want the human readable copy pasted over. So now instead of the formula showing in my cells, it's showing the human readable value. That's great. Everything looks good. I've done my quality check. I actually want to now replace all these values because I'm good to go. One other thing to keep in mind before you import back in is anytime you do launch Power Query, the results when you close and load are going to load on a second tab. So if you've not used to importing into your new system, you will most likely need to convert your spreadsheet to a CSV, a comma separated value. And because it's a CSV, it can only have one tab. It'll get grumpy. It'll let you know that it can only have one tab. And so I recommend if you're done, save a copy, and then with your copy that you choose to import, remove the extra tab here. All right, so we've got our cleaned up values here. We are on our last part now, so I'm going to switch back to my slide deck. Okay, for this last one, we want to check unique values. This one is incredibly helpful for being able to look at every unique version of, in this case, our lexicon, our specific little hierarchical values. It can be very helpful for any sort of lexicon you're working with or any sort of controlled or really specifically formatted data like dates or extent. It's a very easy visual for humans to be able to then look through. It's also a very fast way to be able to pull out all unique values to glance at versus trying to sort through your data, sort through thousands and thousands, perhaps examples, or even attempt to do a deduplication on it just to get the unique values. This has become much faster and is my favorite. I do want to note though, this formula, beautifully simple, it's wonderful and only available on newer versions of Excel. For my particular version of Excel, apparently it has just missed out. So I'll show you the formula. It's not going to work in my Excel. And then I'll show you how to do it if you also have an older version of Excel. So formula, great, probably good for a majority of you. There's still another way to easily do it if you do not have a up-to-date formula. So just a little note there. All right, we are back to our materials now, and I want to create my unique list, especially since I've got values that are duplicate values. There's no reason for your brain to spend time reviewing duplicates. And so, as I noted on the slide deck, we have a beautiful formula for most of you in Excel to use, which is just a unique compare everything in column C. If you did want it to actually go somewhere else, you could specify, like if I wanted a second tab, for example, I could put this formula in another tab and actually direct it to, no, I actually need you to check sheet 1. So you have that option, or you can do it right next to it, doesn't matter. Because I do not have this formula, we can still do it. And for folks who are also in the same boat, let's see, data. So go to your data tab, and then it's near the filter, but we need the advanced filter. And then, yes, it's going to ask us a whole bunch of very common sense things. Because I selected the column when I launched the advanced filter, it has already populated the cell values that have data that it needs to review. So I've got that in place. I can tell it to copy it to another location if I would rather look at this elsewhere. And so sure, and I'm going to have it copy to over here, just so it doesn't accidentally replace my actual data. So copy to another location. I want it to look at column C. It's going to copy over to column D. And most importantly, since we only want unique values, we need to check the little unique records only box. All right. And so if I had used that unique formula, it would have given me the same thing. Or if you don't have access to that, using the advanced filter, but you can see it has only given me the unique values and has not duplicated any of those for us to review. So that makes it a much shorter list and much easier for me to be like, yes, that is the format that we decided it needed to be in. Everything looks great. And then because this is just a check, you don't want this in your data, remove that, or have done the check in a different working spreadsheet. But with that, we have done our quality check. So for our hierarchical work today, we have split things apart. We have still assigned them to the same objects. We have put things together and specified the specific nature of how that hierarchy is depicted. We have then also made sure to remove any sort of errant comma spaces in our hierarchy creation and checked our unique values to make sure that everything was as it should be. So resources, we talked about these at the beginning because contextually it's helpful for folks if they hadn't been with us, but just a reminder, if data cleanup is happening right now for you or in your future, there's a free resource that walks you through a lot of the things to think about, the strategy, the logistics, different sort of cleanup approaches. Great resource if you need it. We've got the collection data cleanup webinar playlist where you can find 2 other Excel walkthroughs of some of the more perhaps basic or foundational types of data cleanup. We also have 3 different webinars walking you through different catalog workflow and standards, which is important to select before you apply data cleanup, especially if standardization was an issue previously for data. Where to even begin with data cleanup, because oftentimes it can be overwhelming, and how to sort of think through what's sort of biggest bang for the buck, what are migration breakers, what's the data that you have to deal with first, and then how to create that cleanup plan, which even if it's just you, it's incredibly helpful to have something that's thought through so you're not trying to be in the moment figuring things out, which for my brain, once I get into data cleanup, I am ready to do data cleanup. So if none of the prep work has happened before, I will get frustrated that I have slowed myself down. So if your brain is like mine, I recommend you create a data cleanup plan, but you've got plenty to work with foundationally and references if you need it. All right, questions. If you have any, I'll be happy to stick around and answer them in the chat. You are also welcome to reach out if you have any questions. I'm happy to help answer any that I can. Again, with the disclaimer earlier, I'm not necessarily an Excel expert, but certainly know my way around enough when it's in the context of collection data cleanup to help with any sort of strategy or advice. All right, thank you everybody, and we'll see you at the next webinar.